When I was a child, I never dreamed I'd ever be going to China. And until last June, when I was invited to join a group, I still couldn't believe it. Our school is a Schools to Watch, which is a New York State and national designation. We've got great kids, a supportive community, and excellent teachers. Because of that, I was invited to be a guest of the Department of Chinese Education as our Schools to Watch organization joined with the Chinese Education Connection to build some bridges and connections between our two education systems. So last June I asked my wife if I could go, and she said yes. Then I asked Dr. McGowan if I could go, and he said yes too. So I was in great shape and got to travel from October 11th to October 20th during our school year. As you can see, the purpose was to exchange ideas, learn more about the Schools to Watch program that we're here promoting with our colleagues in China, to make new friends and to learn a lot more about the rich history of China. We flew out of Chicago on October 11th, and that was a Wednesday early morning. By the time we got to the hotel, it was early Friday morning. So I really didn't know what day or time it was, but I got into that bed and slept pretty well till the next morning. First couple of days we spent touring around Beijing, the capital of China, beautiful city, and it was beautiful weather too. We really were fortunate there. We spent a couple days touring and planning for our school visits, which were to start on Monday. So on Saturday we got to go to Tiananmen Square, see the National Museum of China, and visit the Forbidden City, which was the home of the Ming and the Qing dynasties, which ended in the early 1900s. And when you think about the history of China and monuments like this that were built in the 1400s, and you think about the history of America and some of the things that are only a couple hundred years old, it is daunting. The Forbidden City, 1,000 meters from one end to the next. We marched through the whole thing, and every time I got through a gate, I couldn't believe there was more to see as we visited the palaces of the emperor. We have phenomenal tour guides, and one thing I found out was the little figurines on the eave of the buildings marked the importance of the person that lived in that building. So the more figurines, the more important that building was. The beautiful gardens behind the palace were all behind the palace of the emperor, because nothing more beautiful than the emperor could be in front of the way he faced. So everything that was a greater elevation or beautiful was behind the emperor's palace. We also went to the Temple of Heaven that afternoon, the center of the Chinese universe, and I got a kick out of seeing a little boy playing leapfrog on the very center of the Chinese universe, just like any child would here in the States. But my most enjoyable part of my touring was going to see the Great Wall of China, north of Beijing. We marched as far as we possibly could in the short time that we had there, and I was about ready to go jogging all the way to the end. It was just one awe-inspiring vista after another, and I just couldn't get over that I was standing there. There was a ski lift to go up. Some people could climb up as well. That would have taken too long for us. And then there was actually a very commercialized metal chute to ride a toboggan in on the way down, which was pretty fun. I wish the person in front of me was going faster though, because I felt like we could have had a little bit more fun than I did. Again, I'm a big fan of hiking in the Adirondacks in New York State, and just kept thinking of how nice it would be to have a paved wall like this in the Adirondack Peaks for me to travel on. After that Saturday, early Sunday morning, we drove back to the Beijing airport and got on a plane for Hangzhou. And Hangzhou is a beautiful city, and I'm probably pronouncing the province wrong. Is that Zhejiang province? You say it loudly for me. Zhejiang. And there are about 9 million people in the city, 23 million in the province, and it's like the Silicon Valley of China. Very modernized, very beautiful, but with also a rich cultural history. The West Lake is a worldwide heritage site. The tea plantations are unbelievable, and tea is everywhere you go in China. And the silk markets and the temples were beautiful to visit on Sunday later in the day. Sunday night, we planned in the hotel for our first school visit, and we began our tours of the Hangzhou Yukai School, the New Century Foreign Language School. These are the ones that we saw over the course of the week. And every single time we got to a new school, we were welcomed like we were royalty. There would be kids outside waving flags from China and America. There would be a band playing or a chorus singing. The principal would welcome us. And it was always the English teacher for that school that would be our interpreter. While the students all began English education in first grade, many of the adults would not be able to speak English. But the English teachers were our interpreters, and they were a lot of fun to speak with. As we visited the schools, the principals oftentimes scheduled our visits to see the special area classes. They were very excited about creativity and building creativity into their instructional practices. So we would give some ideas in that area. And their school day was much longer than ours too. While we are here from 7:45 to 2:45, their day would start about 7:30 and end at 4:30 oftentimes. After we'd arrive on campus, they would usher us up to the top of the building, which was usually the 4th, 5th, or 6th floor in these giant buildings, where there'd be a boardroom that would be awesome. It would make the apprentice boardroom look like a plywood platform compared to some of the places that we met with the principals and teachers in Hangzhou. The principal would present to us with an interpreter, or oftentimes they would have students present to us about their school, and it was always fun to hear from the students' point of view. In this one school, we signed a visitor's book, and I actually put our Brighton Believe sticker on one of the pages. The classes were much larger than our classes, not physically, but with the number of students. They'd have 40 students on average in each class, and typically sitting in rows. And when they were called upon, they either answered all together, or one student would stand up, answer, and sit down, then the next student would stand up, answer, and sit down, up and down the rows. And while I kind of expected that regimented method of teaching, I also was impressed with how caring the teachers were and how much fun the students had with their teachers. Great relationships. I was also surprised that our dress, I think, is pretty casual for teachers typically. Their dress was almost like our middle school students' dress as teachers. In fact, one time there was an interpreter sitting at a conference room table. I thought she was a middle school student. She was actually a math teacher who was helping us in that building. She spoke English and was helping us, but if you had seen her, you thought you were talking to a middle school student who had hoodie and jeans on. But they were very caring and loving teachers, and the kids really interacted well together and with their teacher. One of the things that I loved to see was their morning exercises, and every school would have a different choreographed routine to start their day. And this group comes out every day at 9 o'clock, weather permitting, onto a turf field, which was very, very hard. They don't have sports that they're going to be tackled to the ground like American football, so I don't think they had to worry about that as much. But it was a turf surface that was pretty firm, but they would line up. And in this school, there were 1,300 middle school students that just came out of the woodwork, appeared in the right place at the right time, and were ready to go, while one phys ed teacher stood up in the bleachers counting out the numbers 1 through 4 with music playing in the background and the students doing their exercises. Then when it was done, they dispersed, got back to class like they had never even been there. It was fascinating to see. Many of the students are housed in dormitories at the schools because the city is so big you couldn't get there in time for the start of the school day with the traffic that they have. Many parents dropped their kids off on Sundays and picked them up on Fridays. Some students even stayed through the weekend. Some students also walked to school, and typically when they were walking to school, it was grandparents that were walking their grandchildren to school while the parents were probably off working. And the grandparents were very active in the city, and retired people are very active in the city and the parks. You would often see people congregating, retired people congregating in the parks, playing different games with cards and boards and everything else. But that was fun to see. And very fit people. And there were very few people that were overweight. Everyone looked like they were in great shape and ready to go. The classes You can see the balconies the students on were the hallways outside the classroom. Hangzhou is a pretty warm place, especially in the summer. So the students would come out into these balcony hallways between classes and then go back to the same class, and the new teacher would walk in and start teaching that class. So you would be in the same place, and the teachers moved from class to class. And I mentioned they had about 40 students in each class, but they only have 3 classes the teachers would teach typically. So a lot of their day between 7:30 and 4:30 was planning and collaborating, grading, and getting ready for the next day, and also organizing the club that they would run. And teachers all had a club not after school, during school, at the end of the school day, and all the students were in a club. There was an accordion club in the one school we visited, which was neat to see. And you can tell the students on the left, they're probably not middle school age. Some of the middle schools housed a K-8 program, some were 6-12, and there are a lot of different configurations as we visited the middle schools with different grade levels. The buildings we saw were beautiful. This was a music room on the left. This athletic field is probably not 100 yards long, but I bet it's 60 yards long, and it's on the roof of the 3rd floor of one of the middle schools. This was not on the ground floor, so as you walked upstairs and you look back down and you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. And this was a very busy area later on in the day. The library in this school was beautiful too, very modernized. The books were leveled by reading level. So the bottom shelves were for younger readers and the top shelves were for the older readers. And they also had a Lexile ranking on the book to help students know what level they could read. And there are many books in English. And even some of the English titles our middle school students are reading were on their shelves, but they were abridged volumes that were easier reading levels for the students in China who were just learning the language. This was a science hallway made to look like a space lab. And that was really neat. And they had things projected, images projected onto the floor about the science classes and the classes that you're walking through. I thought I was on Star Trek as I walked down this hallway. The tea culture is a really important part of their day. The clubs that they have around tea culture are sponsored by many different teachers. A phys ed teacher in one building, an art teacher in another building would have a tea culture club. These girls did a great job of preparing tea for us. Like I said, every time I turned around, we were having another cup of tea and learning the process and all the things that went into it. The musical instruments the students played, I couldn't even tell you the name of this instrument. I did check with our music teacher, she knew. It sounded beautiful, kind of like a harp, but it looked more like a guitar or a cello. This I thought the kids would get a kick out of. This was a sign on the inside door of the bathroom, and that was the bathroom. We called them squatty potties. They were flush porcelain bathrooms in many of the schools. Now there are plenty of regular toilets as well, and I actually didn't experience the squatty potty, but I did want to make sure I had a picture of it to share with the students here. Paper is also at a premium in China. There wasn't a lot of places, napkins were often just tissues like you'd take out of a Kleenex box here, and you'd want to make sure you brought your own tissues if you were going to use the squatty potty. Everybody was always giving me the peace sign when they saw me and I was getting ready to take a picture, so I did confirm that that does mean peace or hello. It wasn't anything rude to me. I wanted to make sure it was the same in both countries. Their lunchrooms were really neat too. It felt more like a college campus where they'd go in to have their lunch. It was usually on a tray with their own table setting, plates, silverware, and then when the students were done eating, they'd scrape their food into one container. The liquid would filter through the bottom of that, and then any of the other things would go in the right receptacle to go through the dishwasher. And it was a really neat way to collect the waste, one that we do well to copy probably here at our school and in our country. These are students working in a robotics club. Again, we visited a lot of the extra special areas in school, and this is one of the pieces of art that the students had created in a class. Physical education was very popular. Basketball was very, very popular. The kids loved basketball. Badminton was very popular. Table tennis. There was a fencing club in one building. It was phenomenal to watch and to see all the pictures of the students and former students who had been recognized either locally or nationally for their skills in the sports. Their badminton surface was neat because it rolled out onto their gym floor and then would roll up again when they wanted to go on to another unit. But again, everybody wanted to talk about basketball, and one gentleman we were traveling with was 6'4" from Michigan. So everybody wanted to get their picture with him. Everybody assumed he was a star basketball player. He had never played basketball, but he was still very popular everywhere we went and got his picture taken a lot. And I got my picture taken with Ted Wang. He was a teacher at one of the schools we visited and actually played Division I basketball in Texas at the University of Texas, Corpus Christi, back in 2010. He was 7 feet tall, and I was looking up to him, that's for sure. And he was a super nice gentleman and really interested in what's going on in the States. And we talked a lot about basketball and college basketball coming up this season. Transportation it's a crowded area at Hangzhou, and even more so in Beijing. The bike system is phenomenal. We're just getting that started in Rochester, but everybody had a card to swipe. They'd get on the bike, ride, and go where they're going, and then park it back in another holder. The bikes were very inexpensive, I was told. I didn't get to do this, but I saw them everywhere. The scooters were another real popular way to get through. And typically you'd have a road in the center of the street with cars coming every which way. I was always cautious crossing the street. Then there'd be a scooter bike lane, and then there'd be a sidewalk. Sometimes the sidewalk faded into the scooter bike lane, and every morning I'd get up and go jogging. So it was pretty tricky for me, and I'm sure I caused a lot of people some issues in the way I was traveling. But I was very smart to cross with the scooters that were next to me. I always waited, because even when the light turned green and I was supposed to go, sometimes it would not be a good idea. It seemed like it was a beautifully orchestrated chaos, and everything worked well, but I'm not sure that I ever figured it out. The last day of our visit, we got to present to our colleagues, teachers and administrators at a high school in Hangzhou. And I had prepared this presentation about one of the 4 domains of our Schools to Watch program called Developmental Responsiveness. And I submitted it and was told that we'll get it translated so that your Chinese counterparts can read everything. What they didn't tell me was they were going to take the English off the slide. So when I showed this one, I said, why don't you read that one to yourselves? And then I scrambled and was luckily able to find the English version on my phone still. So I kept looking down and letting them know that just because I'm looking at my phone, I'm not texting my wife or anything else. I'm actually looking at the same presentation. And the Americans, anytime I made a joke that were sitting in the front, would laugh at my joke. The translator might laugh at my joke sometimes, but the people from China never laughed. And I finally said, you know, I'm considered a very funny person in America. I make a lot of jokes and people laugh a lot. And so feel free to laugh as much as you'd like. And one of my friends from America sitting in the front said, maybe when you say something funny, they will laugh. And that was about the only one they laughed at. The food in China was a great experience, and I tried everything. I didn't try everything twice, but I tried everything. And I was told that the region we were in, the food was a little bit more bland than some of the regions that might have spicier food. But the food was a great experience, from the airplane food on China Eastern Airline to the food in the hotel. This was breakfast. A lot of soups, a lot of warm grains, rices, soups, dumplings. There was usually some eggs. I'm a big cereal guy in the morning with cold milk. And I finally found some cereal, poured the milk on it, took a spoonful, and the milk's warm. So it took me a while to acclimate to the differences in the menus, but I did have fun trying everything. Out in restaurants, there was always a group. I was one of 19 people from 10 different states, and we'd usually squeeze around 2 tables with a big glass Lazy Susan, and the food would just keep coming out in different dishes. And we'd have our chopsticks, and you'd go right in with your own chopsticks and dish it out onto your own plate, and then fumble, especially me, fumble trying to eat the food eventually. But it was a lot of sharing of utensils as you dipped into those pots, which was a little different too, but I stayed healthy. We enjoyed Peking duck at one of the restaurants. It was phenomenal. And watching the chef cut it for us was really neat too. And to watch that table spin around and you'd grab what you could when you wanted it and move on. But because your plate was about a dessert-sized plate, you never really knew how much you were eating. You know, in America, we put it all on one plate, we sit down and we eat. Here, just you keep scraping things on and you feel like you're not eating a lot, and then you can't even move after you get away from the table. And if you had to, there were a number of American restaurants, Burger King and McDonald's, there was Kentucky Fried Chicken, I saw Starbucks, but I did not go to any of them. Trust me, I saw them and got a kick out of seeing it, but I stayed with the Chinese diet while I was there. And of course, in the middle there, you can see that bottle of Coke. Some of the Chinese I could read was when I noticed the labels were similar. Shopping was a lot of fun for the women on our trip. I didn't really get into it that much, but there are great places to shop. And the yuan was the currency, which is about 1/6 or 1/7 of the US dollar when we were there. So that took a while to get used to, because you'd go to buy a coffee and it would be 30 yuan. And I'm thinking, $30 for a cup of coffee? But I realized that's probably was only $3 or $4 typically. I actually came home with some yuan. So if anybody needs yuan ever, let me know. I have a very good exchange rate. The other thing about shopping in China was there is no price that's fixed. You bargain for everything. So if it was 100 yuan, you would come back and try to buy it for 50 yuan. Then they might counter with 60. You would counter with 40. And you'd watch this game be played out over and over and over again in every shop and every silk market that we visited. These women on our trip wanted to buy pearls, and the cashiers first, they'd get you a bottled water, and then the whole process would start, because you're going to be there for a while and you might get a little thirsty by the time you're done. And it was hard to walk by a market. If you looked in, you were going to get trapped, and they're going to bring you in to look at something. And this was some silk from the silk market that was really, really beautiful in Hangzhou. Finally, after the 3 days in Beijing, 5 days in Hangzhou, it was time to leave. And it was hard to leave because I just was getting into seeing some of the things, and I had so many more questions to ask. And being one of 19, I couldn't monopolize the question period. So I would have to sit back sometimes and let other people ask questions, and there's so much more I wanted to learn. But on Friday morning, it was time to leave, and we drove from Hangzhou to Shanghai, which was about a 3-hour trip, early in the morning. And it was just getting light when we got into Shanghai, and I looked off in the distance and I saw this beautiful castle. And I asked our interpreter what the castle was. They go, "That's Shanghai Disney." And then I looked again, and I go, "Oh, I thought it looked familiar." But that another popular site. But I didn't get to stay in Shanghai. We only drove to the airport, which was disappointing. And then flying across the ocean in the route that you see there on China Eastern back to Chicago, since we left at 11:30 in the morning on Friday and landed at 1 in the afternoon, only an hour and a half flight coming back, of course, plus the 12-hour time change. So it was a little bit longer than you think. And you're not allowed to have any electronic devices out on the flight. So I kind of quickly snapped this shot and put my camera back away. But many people would bring up their laptops, and the stewardesses would ask to put those away. And the stewardesses on these 12-hour flights, or 13-and-a-half-hour flights, they looked as well kept from day one, at the beginning of the trip, until we landed. I don't know if they were going back somewhere and fixing themselves back up. I felt like a monster by the time I got off the plane, but they were fresh and neat and polite the entire time. And all the announcements were in both English and Chinese. And it was always very soothing, like, "Don't worry, we're experiencing turbulence. Everything is okay." And it was, okay, I'll go back to sleep then. But the flight was very smooth, actually. So to be back now, it's been fun to present. I've maintained contact with a few of the teachers and principals that I met there. They would love to have our students visit. They would love to have their students come visit us. They have programs for teachers, and I'm dying to see what new connections we can make with the people of Hangzhou or other cities in China. Thanks for coming this afternoon, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you, guys.